Integrating Complementary Strategies to Enhance Wellness in IBD. My name is Lucy Murray. I'm the Spin for Crohn's and Colitis Cures Manager for the Greater LA chapter. I'd like to take just a few moments to share an opportunity to get involved before I introduce our speaker. I just wanted to tell you about Team Challenge, which is an endurance training and fundraising program. It's a unique opportunity to change your life and the lives of others. It is also recognized as a walking and running support system for patients and their families. No matter what your fitness level is, you'll train for a rewarding and exciting endurance event at one of our great destination races, while raising vital funds to help fund cures for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. We offer moral and practical support to empower teammates to achieve goals they never thought possible. Team Challenge truly changes lives and leaves participants a powerful and lasting impact on participants, patients, and supporters alike. Train this fall and winter to be ready for the Surf City USA Marathon and Half Marathon on November 4th, 2018. I hope you'll join the Team Challenge family. I would now like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Eric Vasiliauskas, or Dr. V. I made it through that one. He is the Associate Clinical Director of the Cedars-Sinai Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center and the Director of the Cedars-Sinai Nutrition and Integrative IBD Multidisciplinary Subspecialty Program. His clinical expertise is in both adult and pediatric inflammatory bowel disease. Throughout his career, Dr. V has been incorporating a broad spectrum of non-traditional options to help patients fine-tune their health to wellness. In partnership with his patients, he continues to explore the influences of a variety of dietary manipulations and other non-traditional interventions on disease activity and specific symptoms, including extraintestinal manifestations of IBD, such as joint involvement and mouth ulcerations. Dr. V, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Okay, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here again. I've given talks on complementary medicine before, and the organizers asked me to sort of mix it up a bit this time. So I've revamped this, and I'm actually going to start sort of from the back going forward from what I've done in the past, just to place a different kind of emphasis on things. So we'll see how this all goes. I have this over here, and one of the things we're going to be talking about is how there's stress in life, and just sort of kind of bringing in the focus and helping sort of relieve stress and stuff. And so what we do actually at my home is that before dinner, or before any meal actually, I've got two sons and my wife, we actually start by, before we even start eating, we just do this. And then we each take 3 deep breaths in, 3 deep breaths out, and then we launch into our meal. So it's part of the whole mindfulness idea. And I got to tell you, like when our nieces come over, they want to use this thing so bad because they love it too. And it's been really neat. We even have a travel version, okay? When we go on vacation, and it does the same thing. The bells of mindfulness, you may have heard that phrase before. But even like my kids now, when they hear a bell someplace, everybody just sort of like pauses for a second. And it's a really neat little tool to have here. So, very good. So what we're going to talk today about is really how to integrate some complementary strategies to enhance wellness overall. Really to add kind of extra tools to your IBD toolbox to help you kind of get the most out of life. I'm going to start with a presentation. And so this is a 35-year-old teacher came to see me who was diagnosed with colitis about 5 years ago. Did really well on mesalamine, be it Azicol, Lialda, one of those. Moved to LA and then flared 3 months ago. Got better with prednisone, but just couldn't get off the prednisone. The local doctor recommended starting a biologic. And I asked, well, what did you decide? Because there was a little bit of a pause. Usually someone will jump in and say, but I didn't want to do that. And so I thought the patient was going to say at that point, what can I do to avoid going on a biologic? Instead, the patient said, I started infliximab or Remicade, and I feel great. Okay, so I'm thinking, well, that's awesome. What can I do for you? Because they were very happy and they were on the road to to getting well. Well, the patient said that he had asked his doctor, what can I do aside from medicine for my IBD? And he said, and then there was this long pause with the doctor, and the doctor just take your medicine. And so the patient was actually there because he heard I'd done different things and said, I want to learn what else I can do. So that's really what this talk is really about. So what is complementary or alternative medicine? These terms are often used interchangeably and really are focused on looking at some sort of non-traditional way of approaching medicine. Alternative really implies doing something in place of conventional therapy. Complementary really implies using things together, kind of combining it with conventional treatment. And the newer term, integrative, is really kind of bringing conventional and complementary therapies together in a more coordinated way. But there's also a very strong emphasis on nutrition, on exercise, on stress management, and a strong support network. And that's really what I think is the best way to approach things in general. Why are we even talking about this, though? We've got these great drugs, these various biologic therapies. But if we look here, these are some of the pivotal trials in IBD using a couple of different biologic drugs. And what we see here is that patients they got a response. Okay, they went from being bad to getting better, and that's about 2/3 of patients if you look at the various studies. 2 weeks after starting or so after starting a medication. But honestly, people don't want to feel better; they want to feel well. And if we think of well as being what we call remission, right? And now you look out, half a year. What we see is that really, sometimes not even 1/3 of patients are actually, off steroids, doing well. And so even though we have these really neat medications, there's a lot of room for improvement. And what clinical trials tell us is in general, about 2/3 of patients respond to any given biologic drug. Actually, any drug in particular, any intervention in therapy is almost the 2/3 will hold. Longer term, like remission or response is about 1/3. And sustained remission off of steroids is definitely room for improvement. Now, in real life, we can do better because we can adjust drug doses, we can blend in therapies, but there's still cost and side effect concerns that people clearly have. And complementary medicine is really used around the world. What is complementary medicine kind of depends on the various definitions out there. This is a picture of a tree I pulled off the internet. And what we see here is that it's blooming beautifully. It's a very healthy, happy tree, right? And you see below, you see the soil. The soil is there. And I pulled this picture off one of the farming websites, and it shows us that, it's not just the soil and the nutrients there, but it highlights that below that there's it looks at the microbiome, the bacteria, the fungi, the byproducts of those things. That all really encompasses the soil. But a tree can't grow just with soil alone. It needs some sun, it needs some rain, it needs a good balance of all that stuff. And that's, so if you think about, people, the other thing is that maybe some of you guys saw this movie like Water for Chocolate. Some people think that how you prepare the food makes a difference, so it's kind of like what love goes into it, that way. So for individuals, the nutrients we choose to ingest, the stressors and how we manage them, toxin exposures, exercise habits, sleep quality, social and spiritual interactions, including our balance between work and play, all really come into play into health and well-being. Now, I put this slide together initially, my initial version was about 20 years ago, and it shows back in the 1980s that we really didn't have a lot of options. It's sort of, least aggressive as the bottom, you get more aggressive as you go up the column here. And now we've got lots of options, but the thing is that a lot of people felt that this wasn't the best way to represent things, and maybe we need to be more aggressive up front to prevent longer-term damage. So they tried to turn a pyramid upside down. Anywhere in here, surgery and I think nutrition certainly can come into play. And if you look at the old way of thinking about the right food to eat was kind of considered like a food pyramid. That kind of got phased out. It was felt to be more of like maybe looking at a food plate would be more of an appropriate way to look at things, kind of a more balanced way, not like really putting one food up in a hierarchy to another. And so I came up with the IBD plate. This is the Western variant. You got you might throw in a little bit of steroids, some anti-inflammatories, maybe a biologic, immunosuppressive, experimentals, and then the fork and knife represents surgery here. But what would an Eastern variant look like? Well, herbs, meditation, yoga, diet, supplements, maybe some microbial manipulation, and obviously acupuncture. I use chopsticks instead, but you get the idea here. So Western and Eastern approaches are different. Western approaches maybe more like a pop a pill type of thing. Eastern, you've got other options. Although, even from an Eastern perspective, I have a lot of patients coming to me like, I just want the magic herb, so it's still not quite there just yet. But I think what we really want to look for is kind of bringing these options together. So you take the traditional options, maybe some alternative options, and really sort of a complementary integrative approach is what will make most people feel the best. So I've seen people get really well with both approaches. But I think for most people, to really get to feel the best, you kind of would incorporate both. So I've actually revamped everything to say now we've got an IBD therapeutic menu. We have starters, we've got classic immunomodulators, we have featured items, the various biologics, combo plates where we kind of combine these things over here. We got a la carte options. We use different options for kids. We use different considerations for seniors, special considerations for pregnancy. There are seasonal options, experimental interventions that happen at various places. And then you have things that are available in selected locations. And you have the alternative menu now too, which would include maybe kind of combining some different special things along with maybe perhaps some of these things. There is sort of an expanded alternative menu. I'm going to touch on a number of these things. But when we approach like complementary medicine, we have to also think about, so what exactly are we treating? What's the goal of the therapy? Is it to just address a specific symptom, or is it to control disease activity? Are you trying to turn off the inflammation completely? That means mucosal healing. That means we look inside, and not only are we feeling good, but we look inside and we see no inflammation. We take biopsies, we see no inflammation. Or is it just to sort of feel better? So one of the problems is that most of the studies in complementary medicine, even a lot of in traditional studies, don't really take it to that level. It's kind of a more of a feel better barometer as opposed to like actual true healing inside. And why is that important? It's because if you think of inflammation as sort of like a campfire or forest fire, if you sort of put the fire out, maybe with a medication or maybe in some cases diet or some sort of herbs or something, but you don't put it out all the way, you're feeling better, but you haven't really put the fire out all the way. And now you start to back off your medication a bit, or you broaden out your diet a little bit. Before the inflammation is put out all the way, it'll just kick back up again. You really want to get that healing. So no matter what you do, whether it's traditional, not traditional, you really want to put the fire out. And I guess you want to put all those embers out so that there's no inflammation there. If you can do that, it's a different ballgame. At that point, you can really, I believe, start to back off lots of different things, and we can talk about that more. The other thing is, are you specifically trying to address joint pain, maybe mouth ulcers, poor appetite, diarrhea, and things like that? So can lifestyle impact health? I think we would all agree that there's lots of studies that show that lifestyle can impact health. Well, can lifestyle impact IBD? And I will say absolutely 100% yes. The data is not as strong for a lot of things, but let's just look at one clear example. This is an environmental lifestyle consideration. This is a study that was done with an intervention. And it was actually a biologic therapy. It turns out that it was with infliximab or Remicade. It was a response to Remicade. So 73% of the patients in this group responded. Only 22% responded here. Now you think, oh, well, the placebo group didn't do that well. All these patients got infliximab. Every single one of them. What was the difference? Well, this one was exposed to toxins over here. This one wasn't. What toxin are we talking about? Tobacco. Tobacco and IBD. If you smoke and you've got Crohn's disease, you're much more likely to have surgery. You're more likely to have recurrence after surgery. Almost 100% of patients who smoke will recur after surgery. That is like by far the worst thing you can possibly do. You're more likely to have more surgeries. You're more likely to have fistula, abscesses, perforations, refractory disease, and you're less likely to respond to anti-TNF therapies. Now, is this all kind of like hooey, or is it like real? I have a patient who has been seeing me for quite some time who had been on Remicade, had a lupus reaction to that. Ultimately went on to Humira, was doing okay, but to do okay, she needed to do not one shot every 2 weeks, not one shot a week, but 2 shots every 2 weeks. And this has been going on for a while, and there's always been some inflammation on her scope. And she sees another doctor kind of locally and comes to see me periodically. And I hadn't seen her for about 2 years. And she comes in, shows me the report, and I'm looking at the intake, and it says she's only on 1 shot every 2 weeks. And I'm like, last time you were on 2 shots every 2 weeks. And I get the report, and she goes, yeah, my doctor says that I'm in remission, and this is the best he's ever seen me. And I just looked at her, and I said, what changed between 2 years ago and now? She goes, you know how you always talk about not smoking and stuff? Well, I finally gave up cigarettes. That had that much of an impact. And we can measure drug levels now, right? She's on Humira 1 shot every 5 weeks now. So, these things do make a difference. And I've seen smoking aggravate fistula and stuff like that too. So if we think about like the whole kind of environment, there's a sort of a neat study that was done. It's sort of a Russian space experiment. It's called Mars 5000. So these participants were isolated in a module for 510 days. Okay, so you're changing, and they looked at like their physiological response, their psychological states. It's 5 subjects, and they assessed their microbiome, what's going on inside. And within 2 to 4 weeks, there were significant changes in their microbiome on the inside. Now, what's fascinating is that after the study finished, they rechecked the microbiome 2 weeks later, and it had almost reverted back to where it was initially. So what the study is telling us is that if you resume your old habits, that is your usual diet, your usual lifestyle, that things go back to where they were. It also suggests that it wasn't completely back to where they were before, and so maybe if you could do a more prolonged change, you could actually keep those changes going if you make true longer-term lifestyle changes. And so what happens when there's a formula that you can drink called Modulin. It's used to treat Crohn's disease. They took a bunch of teenagers with Crohn's disease and gave them Modulin. That's all they had to eat. And what happened was their microbiome shifted. It all kind of went one way. After 8 weeks, they gave them like a partial enteral nutrition. So they got half their calories from a nutritional thing. They got half their calories from regular food. And what happened was that the microbiome shifted again, but it wasn't back to normal yet. It was still partially shifted the whole time. So we can change things on a longer-term basis that way as well. And what else changes your microbiome? Well, smoking changes your microbiome. Exercise changes your microbiome. Stressors and how you deal with stress affects your microbiome. And sleep deprivation and sleep affects your microbiome. So you can see these are all lifestyle things, right? And so, again, if instead of falling into kind of like an old routine, what if you actually opt for longer-term, lifelong changes in your diet and lifestyle modifications? Might that actually have a longer-lasting impact and actually modify the course of inflammatory bowel disease? This will be a really hard question to answer, but it certainly is intriguing. So, healthy lifestyle involves, eating well and mindfully, getting a sleep, exercise. We're going to go through these things. Like I said, I'm going to sort of flip this around, not talk about herbs in the beginning, but kind of deal with that more towards the end. So, many individuals with IBD feel that stress impacts their disease. So I'm sure most people in this room can relate to that. And stress actually induces a cascade of events that create inflammation, impair wound healing, and suppress the immune system. So you're actually more predisposed to getting colds and things like that. And they did a study, not specifically on IBD, but there was a study which looked at a bunch of medical students. And they did a skin biopsy, sort of a little punch biopsy, and they wanted to see how long it would take to heal. So they did a skin biopsy during exam week, and they did a skin biopsy when they were on vacation. When they were under the stress of exams, it took 40% longer to heal. Not only that, so then they did another study. Same group of people did the study, and they looked at caretakers of individuals. People who take care of other people. Like I'm sure a lot of parents here, or you might have a sick parent or something like that. So they did a punch biopsy on parents, caretakers, and what they found was that caretakers, compared to people who don't have that kind of stress that way, took 24% longer to heal than people who didn't have that. So stress can impact healing. So what happens when you're under stress? You kind of get this fight or flight thing going on. So your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, blood flows to the muscles is kind of diverted away from the gut and other areas. Breathing rate goes up, and that's all crucial for life-threatening situations. But even perceived stress can trigger the exact same responses. And so your adrenaline's up and your heart rate's up day after day, and it changes your hardwiring. And these negative effects really can be cumulative. So there is this real strong focus in integrated medicine on mind-body interventions. And one, you can't really avoid stress altogether, but you can learn how to manage your response to stress. And with practice, you can actually retrain your brain to respond differently to stress, create kind of new pathways, and really change what's happening in your body. And there have been studies looking at mindfulness-based interventions in inflammatory bowel disease specifically, a variety of different kinds of things. And they do show that you can actually get significant improvements in pain, anxiety, depression, mood, stress, and quality of life, including bowel movement patterns, by using different kinds of interventions. So in order to be kind of more concise, I'm just going to talk about sort of general things. Not all these things have been specifically analyzed in IBD, but you kind of get the flow here. So deep, relaxed, coordinated breathing actually helps reduce the heart rate, helps lower blood pressure. It releases the natural painkillers in their body called endorphins, and it can really help with anxiety and stress. Even taking like 3 deep breaths a couple times during the day can do that. So like when we hear a bell, everyone sort of takes a pause, 3 deep breaths, and it just sort of becomes kind of almost reflexive after a while. Biofeedback. So when I was in high school, I had a pretty high stress environment, and my mom was pretty high. It was pretty high stress. Very nice, but just it was just always kind of things were kind of like, all this, and I obviously had to do well in school, and came from this Lithuanian background where there were very high expectations. So I took a class at the community college when I was actually still in high school on biofeedback, and so I didn't really know what to expect, but it was really cool. What they did was they hook you up to sensors, and so you can learn how to slow down your breathing. That's actually a pretty easy thing to do, anyways, But then they hook you up to like a little thing to your finger, and you learn how to change your heart rate. So I can go from a fast heart rate down to a much slower heart rate just by thinking about it. Learned how to lower blood pressure, and could even change the temperature between my thumb and my pinky by about 4 degrees. So what this does is this technology increases your awareness to things, and you get the initial feedback from the sensors. And what's really interesting, though, is that if you think about it, if you try really hard to do something, the opposite happens. If you try really hard to lower your heart rate, oftentimes it'll actually go up. And so this trains you how to do that, and with practice, you can even start to recognize subtle changes before they happen. So like say you're driving on the freeway, and all of a sudden things get kind of tense, or you're thinking about something. Instead of like realizing you're stressed at here, you can actually recognize it when it's about here. Maybe here, but you can, and then you can actually reverse that. So, for example, I walk into a doctor's office. The first thing they do is they check your blood pressure after you run in the office. I can just consciously lower my heart rate, my everything, kind of get things down, actually pretty quickly. So it's a pretty neat thing. And when I took the class, they actually showed like one of these yogi masters who took a needle, not to be done at home, but took a needle and ran it through his bicep over here, pulled it out the other end, and there was, no sense of pain on him, nor was there any blood coming out. It was a pretty phenomenal kind of thing to do. So I do recommend it, like my students who are in college and such like that, if they can, take a class in biofeedback, because if I had to pick maybe the top 15 things in my life, other than getting married, having kids and stuff like that, getting a job and whatnot, biofeedback would be up there in terms of things that have actually impacted my life in a positive way. So I actually use those techniques every day. One of our fellows says, sounds like the practice of a Jedi Knight, So I Googled Jedi Knight, and this is what I found, So I guess Yoda was pretty big into meditation too, so that's something I think about. Guided imagery. So guided imagery is like another mind-body approach where you focus on specific mental images to really produce a desired response, be it physical, emotional, spiritual. And you create images, and these images produce measurable sensations along a wide variety of different functions in the body, including heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, even immune function. And they've shown with PET scans that you get the different parts of the brain are activated when you actually do this kind of stuff. So, it actually is producing a physiologic and measurable change even within the body that scientists will believe now. And with practice, usually for something like this, you start out kind of in a group or maybe do it, following some sort of tape or, something on, one of these apps or something like that. But over time, you can learn to kind of do this on your own. And it's also one of those things where you create sort of an image or create like a feeling of, like certain images create a feeling of peace inside you. And you can incorporate stuff into your daily surroundings. For example, my phone home screen has got a picture of Hanalei Bay on it, because for me, that's a peaceful place to be. Or you saw my computer screen was a different image of that thing, as well. I was at I had in my car for about maybe 15 years, and it was kind of on the second engine and was starting to sort of fall apart a little bit. So we'd gone on vacation, and we rented in Puerto Rico, actually, and we rented a Jeep, and it was a lot of fun. My wife's like, well, why don't you get a Jeep? I'm like, I never even thought about that before, So I was at one of these church gatherings. We were kind of doing this interactive thing where we had to go around and ask questions of people. And this 10-year-old comes up, and the question he had on his thing was, what color car would you like to have? And so I'm like thinking, I'll be creative here. I said, yellow. And so he didn't stop there. He goes, looked at me like, why yellow? And I thought, it's a happy color. It's a fun color. Can you imagine getting in and out of a yellow car and not being happy? So I shared this with my wife, and she's like, well, why don't you buy a yellow Jeep? And so I did, and got a yellow Jeep Wrangler, and every time I get in and out of the car, go to work, stuff like that, it's just a happy car to be in, So, and it's like a big conversation piece. People, I was at a rest stop, and someone came up to me and started talking to me, and it was pretty. It just everyone gets kind of happy when they do that. But you can create kind of a sort of an environment around yourself where you get positive feedback that way. So how do we clear our minds? This is a picture of mindful or mindful. They're two different things, right? One person has got a nice clear mind. The other person is like, it's like if you look at watch a video and you got that narrative going, from the producer, and you're trying to watch the actual video, you got all this background noise there. You can't really enjoy and concentrate on what's going on. So you want to turn that off. So how do we do that? So one way is with meditation. Meditation really involves a group of techniques that really help kind of clear and calm the mind. And you focus on your breathing. There's different types of meditation. You create sort of a physical relaxation, calmness within you. It's simple. It's inexpensive. It can be practiced by anybody. And there's really no right way to do it. And there's many styles of meditation. There are, you can do this on your own. You can do it with a tape. You can do it as a group. There's a lot of areas within LA where you can meet up with a group of people and you just get together and you meditate for an hour. I've done that before. It's a pretty cool experience. It's very much a group experience, and everyone kind of goes off and does their own thing. So, if you need that to build that kind of structure into your environment, you can do that. If you just kind of look around. And what does meditation do? I mean, too much of us live in the past or the present. You want to sort of, for the moment, just sort of be. And so if we live in if we're thinking about the past, you're thinking about, guilt, regrets, grievances, sadness, bitterness, all that kind of stuff. Other words, thinking about the future, uneasiness, anxiety, stress, tension. So the past and the future are very kind of not real restful places to be. If you're right here, right now, right focused on what you're doing, there's really not a lot that you have to worry about. So, that again, this is another way of kind of looking at that. But if you're in the present, you can really find peace. And so I think that trying to focus on stuff like that is important. So there's different types of meditation. There's breathing meditation. There's something called mindfulness meditation, where you actually focus on, just experiencing the present, not judging it, not really reacting to it, but you just sort of focus on being in the present. And there's a variety of different things you can do along those lines. There's transcendental meditation, where you either use a word or a phrase or maybe a prayer to kind of bring about that sense of peace. You can do body scanning, where you start with maybe the head, and you move down the neck and the shoulders, the arms, kind of all the way down, and really focus on pain, tension, those kinds of things, relaxing those areas, and that kind of combines that with the breathing and such. There's progressive muscle relaxation, which is sort of goes along the similar lines, or guided meditation, which is sort of like guided imagery, but on a more meditative type of way. But the bottom line is that all these types of meditation increase self-awareness. They improve the focus on the present moment. They really help get rid of negative emotions. They can actually improve memory and concentration, enhance your ability to deal with tension and anxiety, help with depression, get rid of headaches, help with sleep problems. Sleep problems are a big issue that I see. Even help with nausea, vomiting, and pain. There's like whole sessions that just deal with pain and meditation and how to do that. I have some good resources if anyone wants to talk about that later. There's also moving meditations. This kind of follows the same general principle as meditation. But there's like, for example, everyone's familiar with yoga, but there's also Tai Chi, Qigong, and walking meditation. With walking meditation, you're just focusing on the actual process of walking, putting your foot down, and the whole technique that goes along with that. Again, it sort of helps just kind of focus your mind. You can do that in different scenarios. Yoga is a practice where you do different kind of yoga postures, and it's connected to breathing. You inhale at certain moments, you exhale at other moments. There's different kinds of yoga. There's the power yoga, and then there's yogas that are more slow-paced, kind of more for beginners. You hold the poses longer and such like that. A lot of communities have senior groups that will get together. Usually that's a little bit slower kind of paced, and even younger people can actually go into those things sometimes with permission, to kind of not have to go into this fast-paced thing, but just to kind of get the basics down and learn that. And I have to say, a lot of my patients, when I ask them what to do for stress reduction, they do yoga, and a lot of them find it extremely beneficial with their IBD. And then, the various moving meditations, again, they can be performed alone or in groups, create a peaceful feeling. They increase your flexibility and endurance. They can really help manage stress, anxiety, depression, mood, energy, stamina, concentration. They can help relieve chronic pain. They can help with sleep difficulties. Even those sort of intuitive, I guess, they actually help with people with joint pains. People with joint pains who practice these moving meditations actually find it helps them, and it can help with bone health, because osteoporosis, osteopenia are very common in inflammatory bowel disease. And what I say here is, I just want to say personalize it. For me, this is me taking a paddleboard out onto the bay and paddleboarding. A very calm, meditative kind of thing that one can do. And they even have paddleboard yoga, which I haven't tried yet, but I'm definitely going to give that a whirl. So, but when I say personalize it, it's not like you have to choose one of the things we just talked about and just do that. Variety is the spice of life. Maybe one day you feel like meditating. Maybe another day you feel like you're doing yoga. So you can actually do different things and not feel bad about not doing it by just trying to do one of the other things. So you can actually, mix it up. Someone asked about exercise. Exercise has lots of health benefits. And even if you look at sort of normal healthy kids, only 1 out of 4 teens actually get enough exercise every day. And so what does exercise do? It helps promote muscle and bone health. It provides an outlet for stress. It raises endorphins and increases your energy. It encourages social interaction and support. So one of the things I talked about, with the integrative component of medicine, right, is the social support network. There was a really nice TEDx I listened to recently that talked about how important social interactions were in terms of longevity. They looked at a whole bunch of different things, and above exercise and above nutrition was social interactions. And so it really is important. So I sometimes see teenagers that are just like playing video games, and they're not going to school, or they're just playing video games and watching TV and not getting out. That's not good. You really want to increase the outside social interactions. Exercise also helps with relaxation, increases serotonin, which improves sleep, can shift the gut microbiome like we talked about, and it's even been shown to help with the immune system. The other thing is a good night's sleep. It can, again, improve energy, concentration, and immune function. And one of the things that's very common in people that have trouble sleeping is that if I ask, they're watching some sort of screen right before they go to bed. I'm on our school's medical advisory board, and we see this in the high school and the middle school all the time, even in younger kids. They're like always on the thing over here, and then they can't sleep. I mean, teenagers have a hard time sleeping anyways. But if you turn off that screen time 2 hours before bedtime, it actually allows people to sleep better. It's easier to fall asleep. The quality of sleep is better, and so I would just sort of think about that as sort of an intervention. Acupuncture and moxibustion have been looked at in the setting of IBD. Now here the studies aren't as good. There's small studies in both ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. The results are really mixed and not long lasting. The disease itself, the question is it really helping with symptoms or actual disease? And I think one of the things about acupuncture is that it's very operator dependent, and so you would want to find someone who's got experience with any of these things, with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. I kind of view acupuncture as more of I think it's really good for people with chronic pain, especially like abdominal pain and stuff like that, a way to get off narcotics. It can help with nausea, it can help with headaches, it can help with just sort of general well-being, it can help sleep better. But in terms of does it actually shut off inflammation as a solo therapy, I haven't seen that. In general, very few side effects. Although I did have a patient who came in for a scope who hadn't seen me for a while, and I asked if there was any what's going on in her life. She said, "Oh, I was in the hospital for a punctured lung," and I said, "Oh, how did that happen?" She goes, "Oh, acupuncture." Real calmly, I'm like, So again, you want to make sure you're doing it with someone who's reputable. What about botanicals, herbs and stuff like that, right? So now when we think about herbs, it's important to recognize that most of the stuff isn't really regulated. The part of the herb is important. So is it coming from like the root? Is it the leaves? Is it the flower? What part of the plant are we talking about? And that's often not highlighted in, say, a study or something like that. The dose is important. Actually, where it grows makes a difference too. And with again, a lot of the things that are studied, there's actually no commercially available thing there. It's kind of like it's sort of something that this group has kind of designed, to study that way. And a problem with the studies is they tend to not be very long duration, so they're not like really long term. They're all short term. They're usually pretty small in number. They often don't have a placebo control. And the background factors aren't really well defined. And then the definitions are oftentimes pretty fuzzy and somewhat definition-based. But probably the herbs that have the best studies behind them would be like curcumin or turmeric, which I misspelled over here. But there was a 4-week study giving curcumin at a dose of 3 grams a day, and they found that there was clinical and even endoscopic higher episodes of endoscopic remission compared to placebo. So there was a placebo group in this. There's another Japanese study that looked at giving 1 gram twice a day versus whatever else they were on, and it actually helped maintain remission over an additional 6-month trial. They tried enemas. That didn't really seem to work, and there's small studies that suggest that it can be helpful in Crohn's disease as well. And then probably the next best studied herb would be wormwood, which is this plant over here. A study from Europe where they looked at 40 patients on steroids, and it was a 10-week study. They gave sort of a blended wormwood combination or placebo, and patients could be on other drugs, for this study. What they saw was in the group that got the wormwood, there was steady improvement in symptoms in 90% of the patients. And that's even in the setting of tapering the steroids. And after 8 weeks, there was almost complete clinical remission in 65% of them, compared to none in the placebo group. So again, it looks pretty promising that way. And then the remission persisted till the end of the study at week 20, and they didn't really have to add in any steroids back to the group that was on the wormwood group. On the other hand, the group that was getting the steroids, many of them deteriorated after starting to taper the prednisone, and they had to go back on to steroids. 80% of them actually did. So, it looks real promising. Now, everything has potential side effects, right? So if you do studies, they actually didn't really talk about the potential side effects of these things. So it's important to be aware that, these medications can actually lower your blood sugar. So for most people, it's not really a big deal. But for someone who's diabetic or something, you might want to be aware of that. They tend to be blood thinners, so if you're going to have some sort of procedure, you want to be aware of that. Some of these things can affect pregnancy potentially and such. So there are sort of caveats, and long-term use of turmeric is probably okay. Long-term use of wormwood, there's concerns out there that it may actually sometimes cause like neurologic issues and stuff like that. So you have to be a little bit aware of long-term use of these things, and whereas in the short term they may be fine. But you want to kind of do this in guidance with with somebody, not just kind of on your own. The other product out there is aloe vera. There was a study in England in hospitalized patients who got aloe vera, a 4-week study, and what they found was that there was improvement in clinical scores, and there was improvement in even the biopsy scores, but for some reason not in the labs or the endoscopic scores. So a little bit kind of confusing there. This is one product where I've had a lot of patients use aloe vera over time, but it's really interesting because people who go on aloe vera, first of all, it takes a while for it to kick in. I think it actually takes longer than just 4 weeks. But it's really patient and product specific. I mean, one patient, it's like it does pills. Another patient will do like aloe vera juice, say from Trader Joe's, something like that. Another patient, actually came from Ethiopia. If he uses Ethiopian aloe vera, he grows in his yard now, and he messes it all up, he does really well. If he does any other aloe, it doesn't really work for him, So it's a real one of those things where you kind of have to pick and choose a little bit there. And then there's herbal cocktails. I actually have experience with a specific herbal cocktail here, which I found to be very helpful for patients with ulcerative colitis. But that's something that if you want to talk about, we can do that in the office. There's also the idea of brand versus generic. We were going to do a study with one of the Chinese medical schools a while back using this other herbal combination, and what happened was that the study never actually sort of transpired. I realized that they were kind of thinking oftentimes of more like IBS as opposed to say real IBD, and there was an attempt to replicate the product. It didn't work that well because again, where you make the ingredients, how they're mixed up. The actual doses and plant products are important. And likewise, not all probiotics are equivalent, not all dietary approaches are equivalent, and every patient is somewhat different. I'm going to skip over this for right now. Low-dose naltrexone is something you might have heard about as well. There's been small studies suggested it might be helpful for some people, but just like anything else, they didn't really show actual healing on the inside. And there are potential side effects, including vivid dreams, nausea, headaches, dizziness, fatigue. And if you're going to take narcotics for anything else, it'll actually block the narcotic effect, so you won't get the benefit from them. Fish oil has been looked at in small studies at sort of in people who are already in remission, them not flaring, and has been helpful in that setting. But a lot of places haven't been able to replicate that. So. I'm going to move on to diet very briefly. I guess Kelly's actually going to talk to you about diet. So I'm just going to say that does diet matter? And my answer to that is it can. When someone asks me, what can I do about diet? I ask, well, why are you asking? Is it for your overall health? Is it to avoid any sort of nutrient deficiencies? Is it for symptom control or disease control? Do you want to maintain a remission? Do you want to achieve remission? Do you want to prevent disease recurrence? Or do you want to try back-off therapies? And I do believe that it can be used in that way, and that in 2007 and beyond, nutrition and diet can be used therapeutically to reduce or achieve inflammation and reduce the risk of IBD relapse. But again, Kelly will probably go into that more. If you just avoid one specific food, even if avoiding it makes you feel okay, it will not result in it won't have any effect on your disease. So there's something in the food we eat that does seem to affect things. And so the one diet that I've seen work the best is the specific carbohydrate diet over here. They did a study. I'm going to go back to here. They did a study with just sort of a survey of 417 patients, and they found that patients actually got better relatively quickly with the diet, and a lot of symptoms got better, and it took about in some cases 2 to 6 months to 12 months to really see that effect. I do see patients who use diet incorporate that as part of their treatment regimen, and I actually do see mucosal healing with that. So we haven't published that, but I see it. These are illegal foods, so you can't have these things. These are legal foods. They're very healthy looking. Even the desserts are actually SCD legal. And there's some prepackaged things you can do to get that as well. And I know Kelly's going to talk more about those things. I just want to point out that you think seaweed, natural, healthy, stuff like that. This is carrageenan. It's found in lots of different kinds of foods. And there was a study where they actually used carrageenan to induce colitis in mice. So now it's never been proven to be a problem in humans, but nor has it proven not to be a problem in humans, and so we don't really know. I do think there is something in the food we eat that can aggravate things, whether it's directly stimulating the gut's immune system somehow, or whether it's a food additive, or whether it's microbiome manipulation of the gut. The most effective way to manipulate your microbiome is not a fecal transplant, it's not taking probiotics, it's to alter your diet. And any researcher, most researchers will tell you that. And then there's epigenetic triggering that I think Dr. Mayer talked about a little bit too, turning on and off of genes that can impact things. So we don't really know, what it is. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to skip over that slide, is just to say that, the timed response phase of disease actually matters. So what might work in remission when you're in remission to maintain remission may be very different than what works when you have active disease or when you're sort of in a more chronic phase of things. So just because something didn't work when you're flaring doesn't mean it won't work when you're already in remission to maintain that. And actually the dietary approaches that we have, there's different dietary approaches we have for someone who wants to get into remission as opposed to stay in remission. And the same thing holds with all these other kinds of things too. But no matter what you choose to do, how you're going to approach things, you want to just be cognizant of things like in colitis, whether it's Crohn's colitis or ulcerative colitis, cancer prevention. You want to be aware of bone health. You want to prevent complications like strictures, perforations, fistula, stuff like that. You want in kids to ensure appropriate growth and development, and you want to make sure you're getting all the nutrients that you need. So, again, I'm going to submit that combining sort of traditional and alternative options is the best way to go. I don't think that going pure alternative, I don't think that going pure traditional will give the best results in all cases, and usually kind of combining things is the best. And the important thing to recognize also about integrative medicine is that it's not like one strategy. People are looking for one pill that'll make me better, be it like a pill or an herb or whatever. But it's not just the one pill. Integrative medicine, complementary medicine says you take all these different things, you combine them together, you practice them on a long-term basis, and then you stay well. You get well, you stay well. And I think a lot of times that allows patients to then kind of even back off some of the traditional medications. And I do actually have, along the lines of the question of monoclonal antibodies, I have lots of patients who do well on monoclonal antibody as a solo intervention at lengths that are much longer than one would normally see. But a lot of my patients actually practice and integrate all this other stuff too. So with that, I will say thank you and open it up to questions. There's a microphone right there. I guess they asked to use the microphones just because that we're recording the session and exercise. I like it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sorry. I'll repeat the question then.
What are the effects, potential negative effects of use of alcohol?
The potential negative effects of alcohol. So, I think, I have a lot of patients who go off to, I take care of kids and adults, so when someone's going off to college, I usually have this little talk where with the parents, often are there too. And I go, look, from a medical standpoint, this is what I'm going to say. Your parents can talk to you about whatever else, however they want to do that. But really the most important thing is to take medications. I've had patients, and I'll answer your question more directly in a second. But I've had patients not take their medicine. The most common reason for flaring is not taking your medicine. And I've had patients not take their medicine because the bottle says don't drink alcohol with this. And so, they'd want to go party, so they're not taking their medicine, and then they flare, right? Or they drink a lot, and then they get this massive hangover, and they take like Advil, Motrin, Aleve, which sets off their IBD, and it's a double whammy, So I would say, in general, moderation is the key. Most of my adult patients probably drink socially, and I don't have a really strong feeling about that, even with, say a medication like methotrexate. I don't promote drinking a lot, but we have very few patients that actually have long-term complications, from overdoing alcohol. Now, that being said, if you were to ask me, I mentioned that there's not like one specific thing that actually has been shown to aggravate IBD. But I do have patients that tell me drinking like beer and stuff like that makes their symptoms worse. And there are three things I probably heard over the course of 20 years that that come up on not a very often, but often enough that I hear them over 20 years. And that would be that some people think that alcohol makes their disease worse. Again, I can't prove that in a study, but some people feel that. Red meat and wheat. Now, most people can do all those things and not have an issue with it. But that's one of those things, and it's the specific diets actually do like the specific carbohydrate diet eliminates wheat. It allows red meat, but it's not processed red meat. It's like healthy red meat, grass-fed stuff like that. And alcohol, you can only have specific types of alcohol if you're going to do a diet like that. So and it's really not encouraged to drink a lot of alcohol even on those diets. So that's my kind of roundabout answer. Yes. Yeah, that's where I think taking a look inside is very helpful. I often talk about this disconnect in IBD. I've seen people who are doing great inside, but are still having symptoms. In which case we are no longer directing our therapy at treating the IBD with more medication, but we're trying to find other reasons for that. Probably the most common one being small intestinal bacterial overgrowth in terms of what would be causing symptoms. A lot of times there's certain specific dietary things that might be bothering somebody as well. And so, Kelly actually, our dietitian, does a phenomenal job of really teasing that stuff out and making a difference for people that way. But if someone's having symptoms and say the inflammatory markers are normal, it's worthwhile taking a look inside to really see, is it the IBD that's causing symptoms or is it something else? And I wouldn't say it's super common, but it's common enough, that we, I can think of a couple of people in the last 3 months where the inflammation was actually totally quiet. We actually were thinking about switching medications, but it's working, so we didn't do that. And the flip side is that a lot of times people think, especially if you're doing like an ultra diet, if you take two patients with, this is my impression, if you take two patients with the same amount of disease, looking at it endoscopically, right, through a scope, and one is doing an ultra, like one of these fancy diets where we kind of, are doing like, no wheat, no processed food, stuff like that, versus someone who's just eating a sort of what we call free range diet. The person who's doing the ultra diet will have a lot less symptoms, might not even have any at all. And the one thing about being on, say, something like the specific carbohydrate diet is that sometimes people are feeling great, most of the time they are. There's no inflammation markers. All the inflammation markers go to normal in the blood, even in the stool. But you look inside, and sometimes you still see the embers of inflammation, the burning, the ulceration, stuff like that there. So the diet can sometimes give you this misperception you're actually doing better than you really are, which is another reason to really look inside. I really always encourage looking inside just so we make the right decision. If we achieve deep remission and there's no inflammation, at that point we can back off and liberalize things. Maybe it's backing off medication a bit, maybe it's liberalizing the diet out a little bit at that point. But now that you put all the embers of inflammation out, it's a lot easier to do that. You'll do it much more successfully. And I can even tell, like, when someone says that they were doing the diet really carefully for 6 months and they're kind of feeling great, so they kind of started backing off a little bit. I'll pretty much predict I'll see some inflammation in that patient. and I'm usually right. And then they go, oh, I don't really want to do those drugs. I want to try that diet thing. I'll do it more seriously this time, and get stricter with it. So it is important to look at everything that way. Great. I think I'm going to have to wrap it up here. I'll be outside over here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you so very much, Dr. V. Just as a reminder, speaker slides will be emailed out after the conference. We have a 10-minute break and then moving on to the next breakout session.